Production is carried out for profit. They don't build houses and under this system so that people can live in them. They build houses so that landlords and banks can make money. They don't make food under this system so that people can eat it. They make food so that agribusiness and big box stores can make money. And that results in a large amount of problems. For example, right, the cost of rent in New York City continues to go up, despite the fact that there are all kinds of empty housing units all over this city. And why is that? Well, it's because of real estate speculation. The way people who own buildings in New York City make money is not by people living in the building. They buy the building, and they wait for the property value to increase, and then they sell the building. That real estate and housing has been turned into the new stock market. It's a gambling casino. Donald Trump was key in getting all of this going, right? He was the big they call it real estate speculation, where you buy a building, you wait for the market to go up, and then you sell a building. And landlords can make lots of money by not providing any housing to people, right? There you go. Bankers make lots of money. This is a classic problem. You read old religious texts. Every major religion, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, forbids usury. And what is usury? It's lending money at interest, where essentially someone makes money by having money. Someone makes money by having money, right? When a bank loans you money and you pay it back, that bank makes money, but they didn't make anything. They didn't provide a service other than giving you money. They didn't build anything. They didn't create anything. They didn't do any human labor, but they make money because they had money and you needed money, and now they make more money, right? And this is a problem. But here is the essential aspect. Here is what's really the issue. And I've explained this before, and it's a very simplistic explanation of a big problem, a much more complex problem, but I'm going to explain it in very simple terms, right? Let's say that you're a factory owner, and you're making a product. So, when you make your product, you're going to obviously have to, pay some workers to assemble the product. So that'll be your first cost. A is your first cost. That's the cost of labor. On top of that, you're going to have materials. There's going to be materials that are necessary for those workers to assemble. So that'll be B, will be your materials that are necessary, right? On top of that, you're going to need a profit margin, right? The capitalists, they're not making pencils and making, toys or whatever they're making because they feel like it. They want to make a profit. So you're going to need a profit margin. All of that is going to add up into D, which is the final cost of the product. Right? The cost is going to include the labor costs, it's going to include the material costs, and it's ultimately going to include the profit margin. That'll add up to the total cost of the product. Here's the problem. A, your labor cost, does not equal D. You are not paying the worker enough to buy the product, right? The amount paid to workers to engage in production is never enough to buy back the total product that they produce. Now, obviously, every worker in the factory doesn't want to buy every single pencil, but they need to buy other things from other factories. The worker is also the consumer, but the consumer is never paid enough to purchase the total cost of the product, right? This is a built-in problem in capitalism. The worker can never afford to buy back what he makes. Overproduction. And the problem gets even more intense, right? The capitalist is always trying to figure this out. This leads to the boom-bust cycle, right? Because eventually, you're going to have a whole bunch of pencils that can't be sold, and that it becomes even more intensified because the capitalist is constantly trying to reduce labor costs, right? He's constantly trying to reduce the total cost of labor by expanding the machine, right? The more technology is involved, the fewer workers you have. And the more technology is involved, the more easily replaceable those workers are. Those workers that you hire, if all they have to do is push a button, You don't have to train them. They're very easily replaceable. How many short order cooks are there these days, for example, right? If you go to a fast food restaurant, it's basically an assembly line, but instead of making cars, you're making hamburgers, right? They don't need years of training to be short order cooks. They don't need fancy chefs. They just boom, 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 you got a hamburger, right? Book binderies, for example. For years, I knew people who there'd be thousands of people that would be in one giant factory binding books all day. Nowadays, Amazon create a page, you push a button, and a book comes out, right? That workers are being eliminated by technology. And for the capitalist, that's great because they have to pay fewer people. The people they do pay, they pay them less, and so their profit margin expands. However, there's a problem. The same initial problem, A does not equal D, becomes intensified. Why? Because the less you pay these people, the less they're able to buy back the product that they produce. And that you'll notice that in the history of capitalism, all the greatest crises follow huge leaps in technological advancement. That World War I was preceded by all kinds of financial crises and panics. And what was causing all those financial crises and panics? It was breakthroughs in technology. Radios were being developed. All kinds of mechanical breakthroughs were happening, right? World War II was preceded by the Great Depression, right? 1929, the Great Depression. About a decade later, we had the Second World War. We had the rise of fascism in Europe. We had class struggle breaking out all across the Western world. The Soviet Union booming while the rest of the world is in decay. All of that eventually culminates in the Second World War. What caused the Great Depression? It was the fact that Henry Ford and Taylor basically had developed assembly line production. They had made production more efficient than ever before in the history of the world. It was more efficient to produce products than ever before. And so as a result, fewer people were ever hired. And all of a sudden you had poverty amid plenty, right? This is a built-in problem of capitalism, that the capitalist is always trying to make production as efficient as possible, and the worker can never buy back the product that he produces, right? And this is the built-in problem of capitalism that the capitalist cannot overcome, right? It is, as long as you have production for profit, you have this problem. The Federal Reserve System was developed in the United States as a mechanism for trying to abridge this crisis. Imperialism is largely a need to dump excess products on international markets. If there's not enough workers in the United States to buy our cars, well, we need workers in China and we need workers in Korea to be buying our cars. Imperialism is largely driven by this problem of the need to dump excess commodities on international markets because the worker at home cannot afford to buy them, right? That this is an inherent problem of capitalism. Albert Einstein, the great physicist, he wrote a beautiful essay called Why Socialism? In 1949, it was published, and he lays this out there. He describes the problem of overproduction. And capitalism leads to a system where you have poverty amid plenty, where huge amounts of goods are produced and people cannot afford to buy them. That is the inherent problem of capitalism. And the reason that we are facing a global economic crisis right now is because we have just experienced, over the course of the, really starting during the Second World War with Alan Turing's decoder machine, up into the 50s, 60s, up into the 70s with the huge breakthroughs, with the rise of Silicon Valley, up into the 90s with the dot-com boom. And we have had one of the greatest technological advances in human history. The computer revolution is a complete game changer. Never before have capitalists been able to so effectively eliminate workers from production. With 3D printers, with artificial intelligence, we have basically entered a stage where, during Marx's day, Karl Marx, you read his pamphlets, he's always talking about the fact that the worker goes from being a skilled craftsman, right? The wood carver, he's carving, the weaver is weaving, and that they're a skilled craftsperson, and they put their soul into their product. And that capitalism is reducing them from being a skilled craftsman to being merely the appendage of a machine, right? That a factory worker is simply an appendage of a machine, and they don't put their soul into their product. And Marx talks about alienated labor, right? And how there's no human soul, there's no spiritual connection to the product, there's no skilled craftsman, a worker is just on the assembly line. We're now in a new phase where we're entering a time period where capitalism is stripping the machines of their appendages. They don't need workers on the assembly line any longer. They don't need human beings to work in their factories. Never before has capitalism had such a great technological advance as it is having today. This huge leap in technology, eliminating the worker from the assembly line. We're on the verge of having self-driving cars in the United States. People that trade stocks for a living are losing their jobs, right? This is a huge, huge leap in the means of production, in the ability to produce, and it is making this problem that I described here bigger and more intense than ever before. We, the workers, cannot afford to buy back the products that we are producing. We, the workers, cannot afford to buy back the products we are producing. There is a global apparatus of production that has been created all over the world. All over the world, workers are coming together. There's this global apparatus of production where, products are made in how many different countries now? Huge, huge leaps are happening. However, we cannot afford to buy back all these products that are being more efficiently created than ever. David Fox is pointing out that they have fully automated mines in Australia now. This is the reality. And this is the basis of the global economic crisis, right? In 2008, the housing bubble burst. Why did the housing bubble burst? Because the American people could not afford to keep buying homes, and the American people's living standards were dropping. So all across the United States, people couldn't afford to keep buying homes. So people were getting what you might call predatory loans. All kinds of loans that had been previously outlawed were legalized, and people were buying homes, and continuing to buy homes, even though they didn't have the financial means to do it. Furthermore, people who already owned homes were taking out mortgages so they could keep spending money because their incomes had gone down. The spending power of the American public has gone down. The good-paying industrial jobs are not there. The younger generation has a much lower wage and living standard than the parents, and we just can't afford to keep buying. And Alan Greenspan and the economists were desperately trying to keep the American public spending money. They needed the American public to keep buying products, at the same rate, even though the U.S. public could not afford to do so. The income of the average American has significantly declined. That white picket fence, that beautiful suburban home that was the staple of the American dream got foreclosed on. Living standards are declining across the United States, and that's bad for working people, but it also has a crisis on Wall Street. Because at the same time that our living standards are going down, they're producing goods more efficiently than ever. We can't afford to buy back the products we're making. That essentially is the problem. Capitalism is entering a crisis of overproduction. If you want to read a great book, read Nelson Peary's book, The Future is Up to Us. He's writing in the late 90s, I believe, and he explains it in great detail, exactly what's happening with automation, with the computer revolution. Read about it. This is the situation that we are in. This is a classic glut of overproduction. John Maynard Keynes called it underconsumption. But we, Marxists have always called it overproduction. The capitalist is driving to produce products that cannot be sold. This is the inherent built-in problem of capitalism, of production for profit. That is the problem. That's the problem. That is the problem. That is what is driving the global economic crisis. And there's only really one way that it can be resolved, is we need a government of action to fight for working families. And what that ultimately means is we need the state to direct production. Production must be organized by the state to serve public good, not left up to the anarchy of production. The means of production, the major centers of economic power, must be forced by the state to operate in the interests of society overall. We need the state to control the means of production. And that is why China has escaped this cycle. Right? You'll notice that in China, even the private companies do not function according to the market logic. They do what the state tells them to do, right? When the state controls the means of production, you can eliminate this built-in crisis, right? I use the example of the 2015 drop on the Chinese stock market. 2015, there was this horrendous drop on the Chinese stock market, and nothing happened because less than 6% of the Chinese public is in any way tied in with the stock market. The Chinese economy is centered around the government, not the stock market. The stock market exists to bring in foreign investment. It's kind of a gambling casino for foreign investors. But the state controls the means of production. And within a week, the Chinese stock market had bounced right back up, right? Because the government stepped in. They said anyone caught short selling will be arrested.